Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jennifer Rubin. I'm the Vice President of Partnerships and Special Projects for the American Society of the University of Haifa. Today, we'll be discussing the wild and wonderful world of oceanic jellyfish. Many of us have had some experience trying to avoid these gelatinous creatures on the beach or have appreciated their unique beauty from a safe distance at the aquarium. We are very lucky today to be joined by Professor DROR ANGEL, who will offer a deep dive into the intricacies and complexities and ecological benefits of these wonders of the sea. Professor DROR ANGEL is a marine ecologist and chair of the MA program in the Department of Maritime Civilizations in the School of Marine Science at University of Haifa. He previously served as the head of the Environmental Laboratory at the National Center for Mariculture, Israel Oceanic and Limnological Research in Eilat, Israel. Professor Angel is involved in several environmental-related projects, mostly in the coastal zone, that affect and are affected by human activities. He employs citizen science to involve the public in efforts to study and protect the marine environment, and is one of the leaders in the ongoing EU H2020 project Go Jelly that employs innovative ideas to address both harmful jellyfish blooms and microplastic pollution. We're also joined by James Fatal, our partner, colleague, and founding member of J-Cubed PR, who's going to be moderating the second half of this webinar. And Professor Angel, I'm going to turn things over to you.
I'm going to speak about a number of things that are jelly related. I'll talk a bit about what jellyfish are. People have different conceptions about what is a jellyfish. We'll talk a bit about types that we find. Environmental issues, what they do to the environment, what they do to us. Who eats them? Who do they eat? I'm sorry, I just skipped. And what can we do about jellyfish? There's all sorts of issues that revolve around the fact that we have jellyfish in the sea and sometimes blooms, and are there things that we can do about them, or is it something which is just a problem we need to learn to live with? So I'll talk a bit about that as well, and I'll be very happy to discuss some of these things with people that are listening and questions that come up.
I just want to jump in very quickly and let our audience know before you get started. If you are joining us on Zoom, please send any questions you might have in the Q&A box. We'll be sure to answer those either during the presentation or afterwards. We'll be having a Q&A, so please do feel free to send any questions in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to include any questions in the comment section. And with that, over to you, Professor Angel.
Thanks, James. So what is a jellyfish? They're animals, mostly marine, although there are a few freshwater jellyfish as well. They are gelatinous. That's a feature which unites all the jellyfish. They're in most parts plankton, which means that they get swept along by currents. They're not independent swimmers like fish, like finfish and others in the sea. And when we talk about types of jellyfish, I could just spend an hour talking about different types, but I'm going to focus our talk about the more popular types. So this is just a snapshot of a few of the members of the gelatinous zooplankton that we have in the ocean. And you can see here various representatives of different groups. So what we have here at the top is a salp. It's a tunicate. We have a ketognath here and a larval polychaete, etc. And so instead of talking about all these different creatures or groups, I'm going to focus our talk today about on the medusae, which is a subgroup of the jellyfish, and those that most people think of when they hear of the word jellyfish. So we're going to focus on medusae, as it says here. The medusae are considered some of the most ancient animals that still roam the seas. They are predators, even though they seem to be these blobs of jelly, but they are quite efficient predators. They're related to corals and to sea anemones and others. They can be very small, but they can also be very big. There's been some discussion about the fact that they're maybe immortal, and I'll say a few words about that. And we know that there are a number of groups that are lethal as well. So many are benign, they don't do anything to us when we come in contact with them, but there are a few that are quite dangerous. This is one of the biggest jellyfish. It's not necessarily huge in terms of the bell itself. It's a big bell. It's almost 2.5 meters in diameter, the big ones. But what's really impressive is the length of the tentacles. These things can be as long as 40 meters long. So it's something which is just difficult to imagine in terms of its size. If we compare them to the blue whale reaches about 30 meters in length. It's considered the biggest animal in the ocean. But when we put the jellyfish and its tentacles alongside the blue whale, they exceed the blue whale by quite a margin. So it's quite impressive. That's lengthwise. Size-wise, there are these giant jellyfish which occur in Asia, in China, in Japan, in that region. And they can weigh into at least 200 or 300 kilograms per individual. And the bell diameter is similar to the Cyanea. It's also more than 2 meters in diameter. So you really don't want to run into one of these things in the ocean. The medusae belong to a large group of what we call Cnidaria, or Cnidaria, if you pronounce the C. And they're all the animals that have stinging cells. The Cnidae are the stinging cells, which characterize all these different groups. And as you can see, we have the jellyfish over here on the left. The box moon in purple is just some examples of these medusae, I'm sorry. And relatives of those are the anemones, the corals, and various others in order to hunt the food, their prey in the ocean. And unfortunately, they sting us as well many of the times if we come in contact with them. The stinging cells are these nematocytes. So they've got different names, but ultimately they're the same thing that we're talking about, the stinging cell, the Cnidae. So these are these really unique inventions, if we want to call it that, of nature. They have this coiled thread which sits inside of the stinging cell until something comes along and triggers it. It can be a chemical or a physical contact which will cause this trigger to let the cell know that it needs to fire. And they build up a huge pressure within milliseconds and then release this long coil, this barb, which then enters the prey or our skin and brings along the venom that's sitting inside of here and causes the sting sensation that we're talking about. And people have asked, why do they need such a sophisticated mechanism to capture their prey? Well, if you're a jellyfish and you're not going to go along and hunt something actively, you need something which is going to neutralize your prey very rapidly and very efficiently. And these sting cells do that. And there are people who are mimicking these sting cells and trying to use them for purposes such as medicine these days in order to deliver drugs and other things. So they're really pretty amazing. Yeah, so when you get stung, this is one of the results that can emerge, and it's very unpleasant. They leave scars, it hurts, and the intensity of the sting or the severity is really a function of the toxins which they have. It's oftentimes a cocktail of different toxins which are in those nematocysts, the sting cells, and enter the prey or us.
So, Professor, I'm actually going to stop you there for a second. It looks like you're actually about to answer this question. But one question we had just asked by our audience was how deadly and how dangerous can it be to be stung by a jellyfish?
These are some of the most lethal toxins on Earth. There are toxins that within half an hour or an hour can kill people, kids for sure, and adults as well. And so if you don't get treatment, you will simply die. This is something which occurs on an annual basis. People are stung by jellyfish. I'm pretty sure there are a lot more people that die from jellyfish stings than from shark bites and that sort of thing on an annual basis. There's a researcher in Hawaii, one of my colleagues, who has done some amazing work. She's found treatments that can halt the toxicity and actually save people. And she's going around the Philippines and distributing the medicines that she's developed to help deal with stings. And although it's painful, at least people don't die. So these are the box jellyfish. It's the group of the most lethal jellyfish. They can be tiny, just a few millimeters in size, so you'll never even see them. And they can be quite big. What unites them, what characterizes them is that they have a bell which has a box-like shape, and they have 4 tentacles or sets of tentacles. As you can see, these 2 species here are quite different, but that unites them, so it makes it easy to identify that you've got a box jellyfish on your hands. And some of them actively hunt fish, so they need to have these toxins that are going to neutralize the fish very rapidly, otherwise the fish will get away. And so it's one of the reasons that we think they have such lethal toxins.
And that's interesting because that actually leads into the follow-up question here, which was, and again, thank you for sending questions in to our audience out there, but are the toxins related to the jellyfish size or more to the species?
The toxins are a function of the species. So there are some jellyfish which are really, really tiny, and they can be the most lethal. And what stimulated some of the work that my colleague has done is the seals who swim in all sorts of situations and places in the world. I'm talking about the Navy SEALs, and some of them have been stung and have died. And so the Navy invested in research on these toxins to try to find out what can be done about this. And this is very fortunate for all those people who aren't in the Navy, but are susceptible to these things. And so people, of course, naturally ask, okay, so these Cnidaria, these animals with sting cells, they sting, so how can the clownfish be protected against these sting cells? So they've developed a relationship with their host. In this case, it's a sea anemone, and they don't get stung by these sting cells because they secrete a mucus layer around their body, which then the anemone seems to either recognize or ignore, and this prevents the firing of those sting cells. So as you remember, I mentioned the fact that the nematocyst, the sting cell, has either a chemical or a physical cue. So the physical cue is here, the clownfish is rubbing up against the tentacles, but I guess they release a chemical cue which says, I am self, I'm not to be stung. And so this is the idea behind some of the compounds that are developed against jellyfish stings or other types of stings. What do we see in Israel as far as medusae goes? So just a quick run through. This is a poster that we've just finished printing and we're going to distribute along the beaches. And it shows the major jellyfish which we find in the water. Most of them occur in the summer, although there are also occurrences throughout the year. And if I run through a blow-up of these, this is a moon jellyfish, which many people all over the world have seen because they are found everywhere. When you touch them, they don't sting us. They do have sting cells, and the sting cells do have venom, but it works against small invertebrates, but not against people. So if you go to Eilat, for example, for vacation in the spring, these often bloom in the spring. The Gulf is full of these, and yet you can swim with them, and it's a cool experience, and you don't get stung. These guys occur also in many parts of the world, the barrel jellyfish. Some people report a slight tingling due to this or some stinging effect. I haven't felt these to sting me when I've touched them and worked with them. This is something which has been imported from elsewhere. It's a common jellyfish in the Gulf of Mexico. It's commonly known as the Australian jellyfish. When you touch the bell, once again, this is one of those that doesn't sting, it doesn't hurt. The bell has this amazing texture to it. I really like to catch these and hold them. They're very, very cool. This is a jellyfish which has to my mind, artistic value. It's also, it doesn't sting. It's something which was discovered in our shores just a few years ago. It's got this amazing star pattern, and every jellyfish has a unique pattern which is different to another jellyfish. It's just another photo of that. They're very, very cool. This is the most common jellyfish which we have in our waters. They're known as the nomad jellyfish. Not exactly clear why, but it's probably because they drift along and are seen along the shore in different areas. So they migrate from place to place. They've been observed a lot off of Africa, and they appeared about 40 years ago in Israel. Before then, it wasn't known. They weren't reported in Israeli waters, and people didn't really experience too many problems with sting jellyfish. But since the late 1980s, they've established these amazing blooms, which occur year after year, especially in the summer. And it becomes a real nuisance for swimmers. If you take a look at this photo, this is the type of densities which we find in places like Haifa Bay. And if you try to go swimming and these guys are in the water, it can be a very painful experience. Any other questions, James? Should I take a little break or carry on?
I have one that came in, and I was actually going to wait for the Q&A, but let's dive into it right now. It's actually a question from the audience that asked, how did you get into dealing with jellyfish?
So they've always fascinated me, but I didn't know too much about them when I was younger. When I began my PhD in New York in the 1980s, I got involved in a group that studied gelatinous zooplankton, and we would go out on cruises, and there would be different people in the crew that focused on different groups of jellyfish. And I was focusing on an esoteric group, which I won't mention here because it's something which would require a bit of explaining and stuff. But each of the scientists was focusing on their pet jellyfish, and we would go diving, and everybody would go and collect their jellyfish. And then I finished my PhD, came back to Israel, and sort of left that aside for a while, although I was based in Eilat. We didn't have the organism that I was studying at that time. But then I went overseas, came back to Israel, and ended up in Haifa as opposed to Eilat. And I asked, what do people know and what are people doing about the jellyfish which is stinging so many people along the Israeli shores? And people said, well, not too much. So people were recording the phenomenon. They were, it was always being mentioned in news, but not much research was going on. And I started up a team effort, and we've been doing citizen science based on this jellyfish and all sorts of really cool ecological research. So that's sort of a synopsis of where I've come along and how I got into the jellyfish research, which has gone on to other applied things as well, which I might touch on at the end. So if we talk about these blooms that I mentioned here and there, what causes these or what allows them to form? So they've got all sorts of really cool strategies to allow them to survive and to bloom as such. So this is a life cycle of, I guess you could say a typical jellyfish. Let's say the moon jellyfish that I spoke about at the very beginning. So they have the large macroscopic animal, which people associate with the word jellyfish, the thing that we see. And they are either males or females, and they release sperm and eggs, and these meet and form a larva, which then looks for a surface to settle on, and they form, they metamorphose, and they form this thing called a polyp, which is like a tiny sea anemone. And they live on the surface for, it could be months, weeks or months or years. And then a cue, some environmental cue causes them to metamorphose again, and they start forming these discs, as you can see here, this budding polyp stage. And this is a process called strobilation, in which at the end these discs are released, and these are the baby jellyfish, the ephyrae, which then grow and ultimately become an adult once again, a sexual adult. And so this is the life cycle, and if I show it in photographs. This is the planula, the larva that was formed and looks for a surface to settle on. It finds the surface and it creates these polyps, which feed with sting cells, just like the jellyfish or the corals or whatever. And as they grow, they metamorphose again and do this act of strobilation, creating these discs, and release these ephyra, which are then the baby jellyfish, which then grow and become those big things that we associate with jellyfish in the water. So they can either do this, which is one form of asexual reproduction, forming these discs and releasing them, or they can bud, which is another form of reproduction, where a part of the tissue sort of juts out and creates a new polyp, and ultimately this is the polyp that budded off of the main or the initial polyp, and it'll form its own polyp, and it can do more budding and create more and more of these wonderful polyps. Or it can do this really cool thing called podocyst formation. And so what we see here on the lower right photo is a trail of these round discs. And each of these discs is where the polyp was based. So this is the base of the polyp, and then the polyp jumped over here and over here and here and created this trail of tissue. So each of these bits of tissue is called a podocyst, and they can then germinate and form a new polyp. And what you can see here is that this trail, this is the initial polyp which has been hopping along, and these are the new baby polyps that have been formed from the podocysts. So it has a lot of different ways in which it can reproduce and create more and more of these polyps, which can then generate the ephyra, and more jellyfish will enter the water column. The immortal jellyfish is an interesting story. So this is the life cycle of one species that we see here on the upper left, the Teratopsis thornii. And so once again, we have the adult jellyfish. It releases the sperm and eggs, fertilization, we get the larva. The larva settles, makes a polyp. The polyp then strobilates, and we get the ephyra, and once again, the adult jellyfish. So this is a normal cycle. But then if you come along and you hassle the ephyra or the young jellyfish or the adult, they can then revert and go back to becoming a polyp. Instead of dying, they'll become a polyp. And so this basically is a way of short-circuiting their life cycle and becoming this thing which is more resistant to the environmental stress that they might have because conditions are not right. And then they'll go back and form, once again, more jellyfish. And so it's a cool, I don't know if I would call this immortal, but it's a cool adaptation which allows the jellyfish to be more flexible and adaptable to changing conditions. And as you know, the world is changing all the time. And so this is just one adaptation that gives it an advantage over others that don't have this sort of possibility. Medusa has been around in the oceans for a long time. I said that at the opener. This is an artist's depiction of the ancient ocean many, many millions of years ago. And this is a random jellyfish. This is another one. This looks like a box jellyfish, but it's got more tentacles. This is a ctenophore, another gelatinous organism. And these are soft tissue animals. They don't have any hard parts like some of these animals, which would leave a skeleton behind, and we could then trace from the remains of the skeleton what was back then. So the question is, how do we know that these jellyfish were around such a long time ago? Well, if the sediment is a mud, and these soft jellyfish settle onto the sediment, onto the mud, and leave an imprint of their body, then we can take a look at the rocks that were formed from these ancient muds and reconstruct what was there, and that's actually what was done. So geologists have looked at rocks that have these imprints of jellyfish, which are very, very similar to the jellyfish that we have nowadays that are still living, and they've dated these rocks, and so some of them have been dated to 500 million years ago, a long, long time ago, and that's how the notion came around that these jellyfish have been around for a long time. It's not due to skeletons that have remained, but actually to these imprints in the mud. And the same sort of thing has been shown for other critters in the world. So what is their role in nature? I talked about top predators. Who needs them? This is a question that I often get asked when I talk about jellyfish. They sting us, they bother us, they cause these big blooms. They're a nuisance. Who needs these? You know, what's their role in nature? And so we can approach this in many ways. One of the questions we can ask is, who do they eat? So who gets consumed by them? And who do they eat? Who do they affect? So by and large, jellyfish are plankton feeders. They eat plankton. And so the plankton can be all sorts of invertebrates like these tiny shrimps, crustaceans, or they can be fish eggs or fish larvae, which we don't have here in this photograph. They can be algae, etc. So these are things that the jellyfish eat. And if you can imagine a massive swarm like the picture that I showed before going through a body of water, they can do a massive reduction of all these plankton in the water as they go by. If there's millions of jellyfish, they will, each of them be eating a lot of this plankton, and the plankton will be depleted. So that's quite an impact, ecologically speaking. And then, of course, there's lots of animals that benefit from jellyfish, especially when there's lots of them around. Turtles are known to eat jellyfish, but not all species of turtle eat all jellyfish. There are some turtles that without the jellyfish could not do their annual migration across the Atlantic, for example. And there's been some really cool studies using loggers to see what the turtles have done as they cross the Atlantic. What do they eat? And jellyfish are what really allows them to survive the crossing of the Atlantic in their migrations. These are rabbitfish, which we have a lot of along our coast, and they really go for jellyfish. This is a sunfish. It's a massive fish, which is really weird, and they eat exclusively jellyfish. And this is an example of a coral, which happened to have a jellyfish land next to its mouth, and you can see it's swallowing a jellyfish in this case. This is filmed in Eilat. There's lots of animals that eat jellyfish. So as far as function in terms of provision of biomass, jellyfish are important, not just for fish or turtles, but also for crustaceans. And as you can see here, a lot of different birds also rely on jellyfish when there's nothing else, especially when they come up near the surface.
Professor Angel, one question I do have.
Please.
It's actually asking if global warming has any effect on the rates of jellyfish.
Absolutely, yeah. So some people say as the ocean gets warmer and warmer, we find that temperature can stimulate blooms. It can cause jellyfish to grow more rapidly. Some work that we've done with the polyps in the laboratory, I've got a PhD student working on that right now. We see that when we crank the temperature up, the podocyst formation and the polyps hopping from point to point increases. So there's stimulation of polyp formation, and as we have more polyps, we have potential for more jellyfish to be produced. So definitely there seems to be a link between rising temperatures and more jellyfish in the ocean. People have had all sorts of visions of the oceans being taken over by jellyfish, and it's not clear how things are going to evolve, but there definitely is an effect of climate change, of warming oceans and temperatures, ocean acidification. All these things probably contribute to the changes that we see. In what ways exactly is that? It's not so clear. For a while, people were focusing a lot on jellyfish blooms, and the question was asked, are jellyfish blooms increasing around the world? And the bottom line is we don't think so. There are local increases, but we don't think that jellyfish blooms are increasing across the board. This is an example of a photograph taken along our shores. It's showing the barrel jellyfish with a whole school of fish. These fish happen to be fish that when they grow up become commercial fish. The fishermen like to catch this specific species of fish. And if the fish didn't have this jellyfish to swim along with during their juvenile stages, they would have a problem reaching adulthood. So this is just showing a synergism that is an important component in the life cycle of the fish, and not necessarily the jellyfish in this case. But people have asked, is this a symbiosis like the clownfish? It seems to be, because when we swim with a jellyfish and we get close to the fish will go into the tentacles and hide there. And as we move away, they'll come back out again. Are the fish eating the jellyfish as well? It's not so clear. So it's one of these many things that we don't know about jellyfish and other things that happen alongside them. This is just another photograph of a cool jellyfish with a school of fish with it. People eat jellyfish, not just fish and birds and turtles, but also people. You go to the east, and in China, in Korea, in Japan, they love jellyfish. They add them to salads. They make all sorts of cool things from the jellyfish. It's going to become more popular in Europe and probably in the US in the coming years as people look for more exotic foods and for things from the sea. The Chinese believe that there's all sorts of benefits in eating jellyfish, and you can see the list here. Of course, I won't go through this, but there's all sorts of advantages if you follow the Chinese folk medicine to eating jellyfish. And there are jellyfish fisheries as well. So this is from Mexico, Baja California. People notice that if they catch the jellyfish, there are people in Asia that are very, very happy to receive the biomass that they produce. So these guys go out, they fish the jellyfish, they bring them in, they process them, they salt them, they dry them partially, and then they send them off to Asia. And as you can see here, there's a lot of jellyfish. If we compare different types of seafood, jellyfish is one of the top catches as far as biomass is concerned. So it's an important component in fisheries around the world. And it might become a bigger component as it becomes more popular in the West as well. Although, of course, we know most of the population is in the East. So jellyfish have...
I think you have one question on that, Professor Angel. Someone's asked, do you think, I mean, you've mentioned, actually, you've already kind of answered this a bit. They asked, do you think jellyfish will catch on? And you've already alluded to the fact that you think they will become more popular as a food source in Europe. Someone's asked, do they need better marketing? And, you know, it's actually a valid point. You know, the thought of eating jellyfish, you know, it may be the change in marketing to change what people...
Absolutely. So if we it's a cultural thing. People in Asia have been eating jellyfish for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They have no problem eating many things that we wouldn't think of eating. Maybe they've got the right idea. So marketing is definitely an issue. My father was approached many years ago. He was a food scientist. He was approached by a fellow who had the idea of catching all these jellyfish which appear on our shores every year and marketing these in the East. And my dad developed these wonderful products from the jellyfish, but the guy who was responsible for the marketing couldn't find the right connection or the way to market these properly. And so it was really a question of marketing. Your question is spot on. It's a concept. It's a question of making the connections, and the biological side is a non-issue. It's an issue, but it's solved. The issue is really finding a way to take this biomass, process it properly, and find the right market for it. So if we go aside from to things that are less ecological or biological, many people have seen jellyfish exhibits in aquaria and other places. These are things that you can buy online. There are people who market these jellyfish simply because watching a jellyfish swim is something which is sort of mesmerizing. It's hypnotic. And some people buy these. They have different lights on the jellyfish, and it's therapeutic in some senses, and it's definitely an art. There are some exhibits in museums that use jellyfish themes to them. This is just an example from Canada. And nowadays, many aquaria have jellyfishes in addition to the fish and other things that they're more traditional, and more people learning how to cultivate these and keep them alive in exhibits. In Jerusalem, just a few years ago, a huge wing was added, a massive aquarium was added to the zoo, and one section is a jellyfish exhibit. One of the problems is that they don't have a lot of different variety there, but I'm hoping that changes over the years. Of course, not everything is wonderful about jellyfish. We've mentioned the stinging a number of times. The impact on fishers is an issue. It depends where you are. In the east, I know that the giant jellyfish are a big problem for the fishermen. In Japan, many boats have capsized because of running into these big jellyfish. Seawater intake for cooling, for desalination, these are issues because they clog the intake, and aquaculture also suffers from jellyfish. There have been examples where fish farms have been totally decimated by a jellyfish bloom that occurred and stung the fish, the salmon. This is off of Ireland a number of years ago, and since then they've had programs to think about what to do about these jellyfish blooms. So about the stings, we've said enough, I think, so I'm going to sort of move on. This is a case of Haifa Bay, where the fishermen fish on a regular basis. They put in a net, they drag it, and then they bring it up, and they hope that it's full of fish. And of course, when they open it up in jellyfish season, it's full of jellyfish and not fish. So their haul has been pretty futile. They've wasted a lot of fuel and effort and come up with something which is usually not marketable unless, of course, we can create a market for these things. This is the cooling grids of the power plant. In this case, it's the power plant in Hadera on the coast of Israel. There are a number of power plants, massive power plants, that during jellyfish season have to hire boats to go and trawl the water to remove the jellyfish from their cooling basins, because otherwise, as you can see here in the big tanks that you have here, all the jellyfish accumulate and have been known to cause turbines to collapse and power outages in the midst of the summer when we really need the cooling and the power. They are jeopardized due to the fact that we have jellyfish blooms at the same time. So what can we do about jellyfish swarms? Overfishing is an issue. In many countries, the fishers are overfishing. It's not regulated properly. The same exists in Israel. Why is overfishing an issue? Because if the jellyfish are competing with finfish for the same food, the same planktonic food, and we remove the finfish from the equation, the jellyfish will take over. And so this is one way to think about the ecosystem and balancing it a bit better. Coastal development is an issue. As time goes on, we develop more and more. We put out marinas, breakwaters, all sorts of things in the sea. This is wonderful substrate for the jellyfish polyps. They develop on these substrates, and so we need to think about developing the coast in a smarter way, so that if we put out all those surfaces, at least the surfaces should be designed so that they're not as conducive for polyp development. The same is true for invasive species in general. The jellyfish are considered invasive species, so we need to think about strategies to reduce that. Marine pollution seems to favor jellyfish over other fish, and the habitat, as I mentioned before, is an issue. So I think this is probably our final slide. If we can raise awareness about jellyfish in general, education is power. Promote marine stewardship so that we protect our marine environment better. Citizen science is one way of doing that, and environmental education. Communities can be engaged. We have a program where we're working with the Israeli community at large and getting people to report on the appearance of jellyfish along the coast so we can understand the phenomenon better and maybe think about management. And if we can get more funding for jellyfish research, the community of jellyfish scientists would be very happy, because it's tough to find funds for jellyfish research in a bizarre way, because everybody's affected by it, but for some reason it's a challenge. So I think that with that, I've come to my last slide, and I'll open the floor with James' help to your questions.
Great. Thank you so much for that fascinating presentation, Professor Angel. Look, now I'll reiterate that if anyone does have any questions for us, please send them in right now. And we're about to conduct a Q&A with myself and Professor Angel. Professor Angel, the first thing I'm going to ask is actually a question that had so the first thing that someone wanted to know, you were going through various ways that we can try to, I guess, stop the jellyfish problem along the shores of various countries, including Israel. Someone said that given the booming high-tech center, center that Israel has, being the high-tech, one of the high-tech capitals in the world, how come Israel hasn't come up with any technology solution to limit the damage that these big blooms of jellyfish are causing each year?
It's a great question. We're not alone. People are trying to address this all over the world, and nobody really has a good solution. Jellyfish are natural. They occur naturally, and blooms have been around. Jellyfish blooms have occurred throughout history. Maybe they haven't been such an issue because we haven't used the coastal zone and the seawater the way we do these days, but it's obviously become more and more of an issue. If you go to Korea, where they suffer a lot from jellyfish blooms, they've invented these robots, these sort of vacuum cleaners that float along, and they macerate the jellyfish. That doesn't really solve anything, because the real problem, if you look at the biology, is not the jellyfish in the water column. That's a short-lived stage in their life cycle. The problem is the polyp colonies which we have on the seafloor and on surfaces. Those are the target that we need to be thinking about. We're trying to find ways to detect where these are. Most jellyfish species, it's not known where their polyps are found in the sea. So only those that are really big and stand out can be seen by divers. All the others are really microscopic and cryptic, so it's really difficult to find them. We're thinking of some cool ways to detect our polyps in the sea, but we haven't got there yet. So maybe next time I give a talk, I'll be able to say more about that.
Right. So listen, all of us living in Israel and all of us coming abroad on vacation to Israel during the summer have undoubtedly witnessed the incredible jellyfish blooms that you get in Israel during the summer. I guess a question I have for you is why are jellyfish, first of all, drawn to Israel's coast in the number that we see? And is that rate of jellyfish coming to Israel's shores increasing year on year?
Right. It's a question that's been asked many times. We have a website which we established a number of years ago to try to species all those things, and that was the poster that I was showing you is something which has been developed in order to help us to facilitate this effort. We sense that what we see are fluctuations. So some years have more jellyfish, some years have less jellyfish, but overall, blooms that have extended tens of kilometers in length and maybe a few kilometers in width, something which is just mind-blowing in terms of dimensions. And that's been documented in the past, not just recently. So we think that it's a stable phenomenon. It's not increasing. What we have seen, though, over the years is an increase in diversity. So we keep seeing more new species that have occurred here. Maybe they're not absolutely new species, but maybe they've increased in numbers, and so that makes them more noticeable.
Right. Now, this year hasn't really been natural for anything. It's an unprecedented year on all levels. So I guess a question I have for you is, are we seeing any differences this year, particularly to previous years? And, in particular, has COVID-19 and perhaps less polluted waters as a result of the pandemic affected the rate or sizes that we're seeing of jellyfish this year?
Great question, because it's on everybody's mind. How is this year different to other years? Before COVID, before this pandemic occurred, we had a very wet winter. I don't know if you were around during the winter, but we had massive rains, and these massive rains washed a lot of stuff from land out to sea, and you could see the patches of color from all the runoff in the sea again and again during these rainstorms. I was fortunate; I was able to dive during COVID. And it was mind-blowing, the number of animals and the size of the animals in the sea, due to the fact that we had a very, very rich winter in terms of all the nutrients, the food that was washed into the sea. Nothing to do with COVID, of course. It was just a question of timing. We had a very wet winter, and this, to my mind, is what drove the things that we saw. So we saw probably bigger jellyfish early in the season than we would normally see. And it's probably due to the fact that they had more food to eat.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this was actually something that we fielded some questions before this presentation. And this was actually consistently something we got back from our viewers that wanted to know. There's a popular myth that peeing on jellyfish stings can offer relief. Is this true or false? And actually, what can people do to protect themselves against a jellyfish sting?
Right. So preventive, one of the things that we recommend people in Israel specifically do is they go to the website. We have an app and we have a website on the computer, on internet, that provides a map of where the jellyfish have been observed. And so we say, okay, if you're concerned about going to one beach versus another, and you're looking for a place that has no observations or observations of low numbers of jellyfish, that's probably the place you want to go. So that's like the first step in terms of mapping where you want to go swimming or diving or surfing or whatever. If you do go in the water and there are jellyfish, if you wear a lycra suit or something very thin, that's enough to protect you against jellyfish stings. Although the sting cells are very effective, they're very tiny. And so all you need is about 1 millimeter of protection and you won't get stung. So that's another thing that we recommend. There are creams that help prevent jellyfish stings as well. There's a product which was made by people in Israel. Actually, one of the people works at the University of Haifa. So it's a local solution. And so you get stung, and then what do? Well, the common thing that the lifeguards recommended for years and years was to put vinegar on it. And vinegar seems to help. I do it on a regular basis. If I know I'm going out to work with jellyfish, I'll take some vinegar along and I'll spray it on when I get stung, and it helps take the edge off. It's not as intense. It's not the ultimate solution, just like peeing is not the ultimate solution. I'm going to meet with a lifeguard who, together with other lifeguards in Tel Aviv, has been planting aloe vera around their lifeguard booths. And they claim that when they provide aloe vera to people who've been stung, it makes a big difference. And so I'm going to go and meet with them and speak about that as well. So yeah, there's different homemade solutions, and many work, and it's variable. Some things work for some people and other things don't. So it's also individual. And
so you're not condoning anyone peeing on a jellyfish sting?
Say that again?
So you're not condoning or stopping anyone peeing on a jellyfish sting?
Not a fan, no.
Great. So we're running short on time now, but one thing I definitely do want to get to is for you to elaborate on the work that the University of Haifa's Leon H. Charney School does regarding marine sciences and its research on jellyfish in particular. What is the school trying to understand regarding these sea creatures, and why is it significant?
So we'd like to know, as I said before, where these jellyfish come from. So it's one of the things we're doing. We're trying to find out where the polyps are. It's something which we're actively pursuing. We're trying to map the swarms and how the dynamics of these operate. They begin, what drives the swarms. You asked earlier, why do we have so many jellyfish in the Eastern Med? So we're trying to get at a combination of the biology, which we know, but also the physics that's driving it. Are the currents the main reason that the jellyfish accumulate along our shores? Is it also a behavioral thing? Are the jellyfish actively swimming in a certain way so that they're congregating along our shores? Where do they go from Israel? Do they go north through Syria up to Turkey? Do they go out to Cyprus, to Greece? There's a big question about what happens with the biomass. It's a huge amount of material. When it descends, it's got to be food for the deep sea critters. How rapidly do they decay? What do they release? There's a myriad of questions that we're asking that we don't know simply because we haven't looked at these things before. So these are just some of the questions. On the applied side, I'll just say 2 words about the project which was mentioned at the very beginning, I think, by Jennifer. I'm a member of the Go Jelly project, and it's a project which is looking at using jellyfish. If we have these blooms, what can we do with this? What positive things can we do with it? So, as I said before, food for people is one option. People are looking into using the jellyfish as fertilizer in agriculture, as something which can be used in cosmetics. You take the collagen from the jellyfish and you make cosmetic products. And my group is looking specifically at trying to capture microplastics in wastewater treatment plants using the mucus from the jellyfish. So it's a whole aside, trying to produce a product which will help us to reduce what's emitted by these wastewater treatment plants and reducing the flux of these microplastics into the environment. So that's part of what we're doing. It's not everything, but yeah, I think it captures a few of the things that we're doing with jellyfish. It's a fascinating group, and I'm hoping that we have an opportunity to work on it for many years more.
Wonderful. Professor Angel, I want to thank you for everything today. It was a fascinating presentation. Thank you for sharing your knowledge and educating all of us on it. And thank you to everyone out there for tuning in. And I'm going to hand you over back to Jen.
Excellent. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor Angel. Thanks so much for sharing your expertise and for offering a more close-up and comprehensive understanding to all the wonders and impact the jellyfish have on our oceanic ecosystem. And James, of course, thanks to you for moderating and for fielding the tough questions. If you have any questions or would like more information about today's discussion or anything related to University of Haifa, please contact us at info@asuh.org. If you would like to support any of the university's marine science initiatives or any other university faculties or programs, please visit www.asuh.org/donate. Thank you all for joining us today. Be healthy and well, and we'll look forward to seeing you soon.